Welcome to the KP podcast. My name is KP, and today's guest is a man whose passion stretches across classrooms, ball fields, and history books. Dr. Paul Semendinger is a lifelong educator, a principal turned professor, and a gifted storyteller whose work spans children's literature, historical fiction, motivational writing, and, of course, baseball history. He is the editor-in-chief of the Yankees blog Start Spreading the News, the co-author of Roy White's autobiography from Compton to the Bronx, and the author of the deeply researched and beautifully told The Least Among Them, a book that gives overlooked Yankees players their moment in the sun. And of course, coming up in 2026, the greatest Yankees by uniform number is also going to be released. And that's a great intro. But beyond all that, Dr. Semendinger is a marathon runner, a competitive ball player, a music enthusiast, and a devoted family man. And he's with us today to share some thoughts about one of his books, The Least Among Them. Dr. Semendinger, welcome to the show.
KP, and of course you can call me Paul. It is my pleasure. I consider you a friend, and I'm glad to join you. Had just joined my show a couple of days ago. We had a great conversation that we're going to have to continue there as well. You're a delightful person, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here with you.
Fabulous, Paul. And the full title of this book is The Least Among Them: 29 Players, Their Brief Moments in the Big Leagues, and a Unique History of the New York Yankees. This book came out in 2021. Now, Paul, when I think about unsung heroes in Yankees history, I often think about Melito Perez, who had an outstanding 92 season that's been lost to history. I think about Aaron Small. I think about Ruben Sierra. I think about Horace Clarke, just to name a few. But your book, The Least Among Them, is unique in that it tells the stories of the players who appear in only one game in the big leagues, just one game, and all with the Yankees. So, what inspired you to write this particular book, Paul?
That's a great question. The story, I guess, comes down to that wonderful game. I have a copy of it behind me, Stratomatic Baseball. And every year they make cards for all the Yankees. And I was given that game by my grandma when I was just a kid, and I've always had a fascination with flipping through the cards and looking at rosters. And so one day I was just sort of looking at Yankee rosters and of all the guys who ever played for the Yankees. And I started coming across names of guys who played for the Yankees for one game. Like you probably remember Brad Arnsberg, but he had played for the Texas Rangers too for a while, and maybe another team off the top of my head. I can't remember. I remember he got hurt. He pitched only once for the Yankees. But then I said, I wonder how many guys played in just one game as a Yankee. And I started making a list. And then I thought, I wonder how many guys played on the Yankees for just one game, and that was their entire career, which then ties into the story of Field of Dreams because the one character in that book or the movie and the book Shoeless Joe is Moonlight Graham, who played in just one game for his major league career.
It's fabulous. And for the Stratomatic, I assume it is just the board game version, not the computerized version.
That is correct. I've never played the computerized version. We do so much on the computer. And you and I talked about this when you sent your book to me. It's very hard for me because I do so much on the computer every day. If someone like sends me a book on the computer to sit in front of the computer screen and read, because when I want to read, I like holding it in my hand. My wife has a Kindle. I If I'm doing work, a lot of it's on the computer, and if I'm doing something that's not work, I want to break away from the computer and the screen. So.
That's fair enough. And for this particular book, I just want to say, like, again, the book is titled The Least Among Them. I like how you included great stories after each player profile. For example, in the chapter about Hal Stoll, who pitched, in one inning in 1960, you added the story about Dave Righetti. You kind of told the story in a sidebar, as a sidebar story, if you will, for every all of the 29 individuals you listed. I want to actually thank you for the information about Wally Pipp, of course, who played a lot of games. But baseball fans hear that name, Wally Pipp, and think that he was a soft player, but he really wasn't. So thank you for discussing Wally Pipp as well. Now, I just want to kind of get back to that a little bit. Why did you include Wally Pipp in one of the sidebar stories, and why do you think that the headache myth has struck so strongly to his legacy?
Yeah, it's a shame that there are stories about baseball players and people, actually everybody, right? And anybody in history, there are stories that just aren't true. I do not believe that George Washington chopped down a cherry tree, for example. And so sometimes those stories are made to help a person's legend. George Washington was such a great human being and such a great American and such a great founder. I don't think his story needed any embellishing. And it sort of takes away from the story of George Washington when you have kids in school. I remember being in second grade and, cutting out hatchets. Like, that's the thing we have to remember about a story that's not true. So I think there's something in the way we remember history and the way we remember people that the myths sometimes take over for the truth. And I've always felt Wally Pipp got a bad rap because, they say he begged out of the lineup because he had a little bit of a headache. And then Lou Gehrig jumped in and never didn't miss a game. And that was the end of Wally Pipp's career. So in the book, in one of the sidebars, I call them extra innings. I tell the truth about Wally Pipp and the fact that he got beamed. He didn't just have a headache. I mean, he had been beaten a couple times, as I recall. And then he went on and he played a number of years with the Cincinnati Reds. And what people also don't know about Wally Pipp, they think that the first Yankee to ever lead the league in home runs was Babe Ruth, but that wasn't true. Wally Pipp led the league in home runs twice as a Yankee before Babe Ruth ever became a Yankee. And I just think it's unfair that some people's legends are tainted because there's a narrative that just isn't the truth. And so I wanted to set the record straight a little bit on Wally Pipp.
And how did you tie Wally Pipp's story into as a sidebar into chapter 24, which is about a player named Odom?
Oh, now you're gonna I have to look that up. I have to I have to see what let's see. I have to look up chapter 24 to see where I was making the connection on that. I explained it, I believe, in the text, but let's see. 186. So let's see. He entered as a replacement for Joe Dugan. Oh, you're stumping me on this one. I forget the connection that I made. As you said in the beginning, you're making me feel old, JP. Because here it is. In 1925, the Yankees featured a collection of legendary players. Five players on 25 squad would gain enshrinement in the Hall of Fame. One of them was Lou Gehrig, but he was playing in right field. The reason he
Right.
was playing in right field was Wally Pipp was the star first baseman. Um, and so that gave me an avenue to talk about Wally Pipp. With each of the stories, I tried to draw a connection. So let me expand upon my thinking here for just a moment. When I wrote this and got it published, it won some awards. People have told me how great it is. But to take one step backwards again, that was 2021, you said at the top. That's 4 years ago. You're making, I mean, it seems like yesterday. So I feel like I'm getting older and older, that this book is that many years old already. But I thought and I did, came across a really fun thing. They have those books like Chicken Soup for the Soul and Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul and Chicken Soup for the Mother and Chicken Soup for the Grandmother and I don't know, car repairs for dummies, computer repairs for dummies, house repair for dummies. And they have these series, and I thought this could be something where I write a series. I could do the least among them Red Sox. I could do the least among them Dodgers. I could expand to the NBA and do the least among them New York Knicks and the least among them football Giants and Jets or whatever. But I realized quickly that with all modesty aside, a deep knowledge of the Yankees. I've studied the Yankees my entire life. Since like 1977, I've read a gazillion Yankee books and articles, and like you, the backs of baseball cards, and watched a million games and seen documentaries. And so when a thing came up for this book that was a connection, oh, Wally Pipp, Gehrig was in right because Wally Pipp played first. I know what I'll do. I'll tell the story of Wally Pipp there. But I don't have that kind of deep knowledge that to be able to pull a story out of thin air for the Red Sox or the Dodgers. I could do some, but I don't think I could do a book justice. And if you get out of baseball, I couldn't possibly do it for any of the other sports. So at one point, I did ask a copywriter, can I copyright this, the least among them? And you're really not allowed to do that kind of thing. So somebody could take my idea and do it for the Red Sox. I hope if they do, or any other team, that they at least give a hat tip to me and say, Paul Semendinger invented this idea.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because yeah, the connection it looked like it was because of 1925. Just wanted to kind of get you to expand on it, but that's great because a lot of times when we as fans um watch the game or read about the history of the team, we think we know a lot about the that particular club. I'll give you an example right here. Like often now when I do research for my own writing, I often find information that I didn't know before, even if it was fairly recent. I'll give you an example, not from 50 years ago, but let's say more recent. I was researching certain things and I will share the Yankees related stuff with you. I did not realize until like maybe a month ago that Jimmy Key wasn't even the second choice for the Yankees in the 1992 offseason. I found out he was like their seventh choice. And after Greg Maddux said no, David Cohn said no. This is
Barry
92
Bonds said
offseason.
no that winter.
Well, among the pitchers,
Okay.
Doug Drabeck said no. Apparently, Greg Swindell said no. Even Pete Shorrock said no. I read Jose Guzman, and the seventh choice among pitchers was Jimmy Key. But think about that: Pete Shorrock, Greg Swindell ahead of Jimmy Key on the Yankees list. And I just found that out, a month ago from reading some old New York Times newspaper article. Is that same offseason in 1992? The Yankees were interested in Ruben Sierra, who was a free agent, but apparently Sierra just wanted to sign a deal quickly with Oakland, and that was it. I understand the Yankees were going to offer way more money to get Sierra in pinstripes to go with Bernie Williams and Paul O'Neill in the outfield, and then turn Danny Tartabull into a DH. It was reported that, in the New York Times that the Yankees thought they could sign Sierra in 92 and turn that team into a serious pennant contender. So again, that was fascinating to me because of the things that the dynamics might have changed if for example, Drayback went to the Yankees instead of Jimmy Key, So when you did your research for this book, The Least Among Them, were there any like major surprises that fascinated you in a way that we thought, wow, I did not know this and this is mind-blowing?
Oh, the entire yes, 100%. The entire research process just opens up eyes, right? Like you never realize that. Oh, wow. Number one, just reading the stories of all these players. One guy like Frank Verdi, who I was very familiar with because I had a minor league manager card of Frank Verdi when he was a manager of the Columbus Clippers. Because TCMA put those cards out in the early 80s, at least the ones that I had, of the Yankee minor league teams or whatever. And I used to order them through the mail. And so I knew Frank Verdi. I didn't realize that he had only played one game as a major leaguer. And then that really his career, and he's in the International League Hall of Fame as a manager. His greatness in his career was really as a manager. But I learned that. I learned about you also know this. There's stuff that just doesn't get into the book. You find yourself going down these paths saying, "Oh, this could be something." There was something called the outline. I can't expand upon it because obviously the research for this book is now like 8 years old. when I was really getting deep in it. But there was like a league of called the Outlaw Baseball League in the Carolinas in like the 1920s, and one of the guys had an affiliation after he was a Yankee. He was like the president of an outlaw baseball league, which was sort of like a semi-pro thing where they had industries and players. They went from one industry, one company to another, and they didn't get paid, but they did get paid. And and I said, "Oh, this is fascinating," but in order to tell that story, it would have taken far, far, far too long. And when I published the book, when I submitted it to my publisher, obviously there's an editing piece, and he didn't want the extra inning passages most often to be longer than the story about the players. I couldn't tell the Outlaw Baseball League story in just a few pages, so that had to go, like onto the cutting room floor. But yes, there were a million stories of players and events. Tom Burr, for example, fought in World War I as a fighter pilot. I'd never known that there were too many baseball players or any baseball players that flew biplanes in World War I. So yeah, a host of fascinating facts and stories about people as humans and baseball players that I hadn't known previously.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that specifically, Paul, that last bit, because in the book you mentioned that one of these players actually served in both World Wars. That to me is kind of fascinating. Um, would you be able to mention briefly about this player who served in both World Wars? Because that's fascinating on its own, and a little bit about
That's
his
George
backstory.
Batten, I believe. Chapter 12. Yeah, he because he went into the military afterwards. And um yeah, he might be the I wouldn't I don't know that, but he might be the only major league player, only played one game, who actually appeared in both world wars. You have guys like Jerry Coleman who appeared in Korea and World War II. You have guys like Ted Williams that did that. But I don't know of any other person who served in both world wars and played Major League Baseball.
Exactly. That's what makes this book so fascinating is that there's pages of tidbits and information that jumps out and is so interesting. And I thank you for writing this book. But how did you do the research for these players? Because obviously having played only one game and a lot of these players played during the dead ball era or more than 50 years ago. So talk about the difficulty of the research, or was it not as difficult as one might think?
No, no, the research for some of these guys was very hard because of the fact that there just wasn't a whole lot of information on them, especially the guys who played early on in baseball's history. So, my research process really consisted of three main steps. The first was just researching online. You type in the guy's name, you try alternative spellings, you type in Highlanders, you type in Yankees, and you hope that somehow as you dig through all the websites that come up, that something comes up. For most of these guys, or for many of these guys, that didn't happen. But there are sites like Find a Grave where you put the guy's name in. I'm doing research on a series of books on the Battle of Gettysburg, and you'd be surprised how much information that are found on sites like that, where people, family members, or whatever, also add in tidbits of information about people's where their graves are located, and then other people link an obituary or they copy something from an old period biography that no one has seen since 1875 or whatever, and you slowly get information that way. But after that, then what I did was I subscribed to newspaper.com, and I would always have obviously the period of time where the person was playing, and so I would then search newspapers about that player and about that time period. Now, a guy like Hal Stowe has a name that's not super common, but it's not uncommon. If you're looking at Paul Semendinger, there's probably not a whole lot of articles that wouldn't be related to my direct family. But, Stowe is a common enough surname that if you just put Hal Stowe in there, you could have 40,000 hits on newspaper.com. So you have to, you know, put it into the period of time where he played. You find out where he went to college. You try to find up newspaper articles from their collegiate years and things like that, and you slowly piece it together. Then finally, the last step was the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown actually has a file on every single Major League Baseball player. And so I reached out to the Hall of Fame and their wonderful research librarian director, Cassidy Lent, told them of my project and made an appointment, went to the Hall of Fame library. I actually did it twice. And when you're a researcher and you tell them exactly what you need, when you get to the library, they actually have all the files pulled for you. And some of those files actually were empty. One file had a mistake, so I corrected it. The Baseball Hall of Fame has a correction in it on a piece of paper in a file folder in some file cabinet that's only corrected because of me, and which is really like maybe that goes on my gravestone. Corrected one piece of paper in the Hall of Fame. But that's how I did it. You piece it all together and you find what you can. And those were the three main ways that I did my research.
That's fascinating, Paul. I want to also ask about, you mentioned earlier in the conversation about like this goes back 8 years. So that means all the research, all the writing, it took place for several years. And did you get a point where, even as a Yankees fan, a big Yankees fan like yourself, did it ever get to a point where you felt overwhelmed that had to take a break from it? Like what kept you motivated, I guess, is what I'm asking in continuing this project until the end.
KP, I love the questions you ask. Yes, I think with any project, you get to the point where uh, I've written 20 of these biographies. I have nine to go. And again, maybe if the biographies were about Washington and Lincoln and Grant and whatever, Mozart, like where there's a lot of information, you could say, wow, I could really dive into all these great things these people did. It's hard when there's not a whole lot to say about some of the guys and you're digging and digging for information and you can't really find it. So yes, of course, but I'm highly motivated. I thought I had a great idea, and I guess I did. And when I start a task, I want to finish it and see it through. So, it's the same as getting a doctorate. It's the same as running a marathon. There's sometimes you don't want to go out there and run, but you have to, right? There's a task ahead, and that race is coming, and you need to put a 20 miler down. So, it might be cold, it might be rainy, you might have other things you want to do, but you go out there and you log 20 miles because you have to. And so you write nine more stories about nine more Yankees that no one's ever heard of because that was what you had to do. That's what I had to do. I like I say, I'm motivated and I just follow through on a task. I have a Yankee book that I have a preliminary, I won't tell you anything about it, but it's in a similar realm, but it's different, but it's in a similar realm. That I have a handshake agreement in principle that I'll start working on maybe within a year or so. And that feeling of, oh boy, this is going to be a task. This is going to take a lot of work to do what I needed to do is already, I'm already feeling that kind of pressure. I'll do it because it's going to be a spectacular book. It's a brilliant idea. And I don't want to say anything about it because I don't want anybody to steal it. But that's about a year or two away because again, I'm working on this series of Gettysburg books as well, which are all biographies of guys who fought at the Battle of Gettysburg, and that gets tedious too. Like this guy was here and this is where he did. But again, you do it to the end. You have it. I think these are great ideas, and I think they're great stories. And sometimes you'd rather I don't know go to the movies or go to a ball game or sit on your porch or do something else. But you just got to get it done. That's how you become successful. You there's a task and you do it.
That's great advice for any kind of aspect in life, actually, Paul. Now, one idea that maybe we can steal from you is like organization, because that's a big part of writing. It's maybe a lot of readers or people don't understand like the work that goes into writing. It's not just sit down and start typing, but organizing all the player profiles of 29 plus players. Um, do you have a method where you let's say you print out all the things you research and put on one pile, you have like file folders, or is it all done electronically with all these? I would imagine it's something printed out because I know you mentioned that you don't want to do everything that's on a computer. So tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so with this book, that's how I did it. I printed anytime I found something, I printed it. That's an important aspect when you're doing research. You teach, you're a teacher, and I'm still teaching collegiately, and AI is so powerful now that we have to come up with ways to make sure that when people get information, they explain where they got that information from. So if I'm doing something electronically and I'm making a note, I'm automatically linking and citing where I got that from. Whether I have a little note on the bottom of the page, like a little asterisk, and it's anything with that asterisk came from, I don't know, Shelby Foote's The Civil War a Narrative or whatever. Um, that's sometimes how I do it electronically, but when I was working on this book, I printed everything out and I put the document or the place where I got the information from, and then I had piles, yeah, and folders for each of the guys. And one of the things after being at the Hall of Fame, I came home with a plethora of information, and so I had to make sure that I documented where everything I got came from. They let you make photocopies if you're doing research in there. At least they used to. They didn't charge you for the photocopies. It was really a great way to, resource for writers. But I had to make sure that each time I did that, I wrote exactly where the document came from, or it would have been a mess at the end. I wouldn't have never been able to cite where that information came from. So a little bit electronically, definitely when I did this book, everything was done on paper.
Do you ever keep like a notebook with you to jot ideas down that come to your head suddenly in case you forget? Do you do anything like that at all?
Yes, and I have novels, ideas for novels, and things like that I write down. The other day, I came upon a whole bunch of scraps of paper where I was just writing ideas down, and I kept putting them in a drawer. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, what am I doing here? I don't even know where to start." So, but the ideas were written down. So, I don't know if there's enough time in the rest of the history of the world for me to get all the ideas I have down into books because we just ran out of time.
That's exactly it. We're talking with Paul Semendinger about his book, The Least Among Them, 29 Players, Their Brief Moments in the Big Leagues, and a Unique History of the New York Yankees. Now, of course, this book is for baseball fans, for Yankees fans specifically. And we mentioned it's not just about, those players who played in only one game in the big leagues, all with the Yankees, but also there are sidebar stories as well with other more famous Yankee players. But what do you hope the readers take away from these stories?
You're the best. KP, I've done a lot of these podcasts, a lot of book talks about this book at various places, and you're asking questions that other people have never asked, which is just fascinating, and I love it. I want them to be entertained and I want them to be educated, right? Right. I don't want anybody to read my book and be like, that is the most boring thing I ever had to get through. That would upset me. But I'm hoping that when they read the book, that they learn something and something maybe about a guy like Wally Pipp, or I make the point. I sort of make the point that I believe Babe Ruth pointed when he hit that home run in the 1932 World Series. And I explain why. And I tell the stories of Yankees who served in combat in World War II. So there's information that nobody had ever really compiled together in that sort of way. And So I'm hoping that they read the book and they go, you know what? That's pretty cool. I never knew that. That's fun. I'm glad I read this book because Paul Semendinger just told me something and taught me something I never knew. And but again, I want it to be written in a way that's readable and enjoyable. I don't want them to say, I learned that, but boy, oh boy. I don't know if you ever read Moby Dick. Have you ever read Moby Dick?
Yes.
All right. So, there are chapters on Scrimshaw. There's chapters on the way they made the rope on the giant whaling ships. Like, I read it, I learned something, but I walked away from that book saying, oh my goodness, I don't know if I really enjoyed reading it. I don't want them to do that with my books and say, well, I learned something, but boy, oh boy, that was tough to get through.
All right, that's great, Paul. Now out of all these players who played only one game in the major leagues, is there one that stood out to you and as a biggest what if story? If only he had had a shot, he would have, made the Hall of Fame or been an All-Star. Was there any one player that stood out in your mind?
There were a number of them. A number of these guys got hurt. They had such promise, and one guy fell off a dock and it hurt his arm, and it's tough to become a major leaguer. But I guess if you have to pick one guy, there's two. Elvio Jimenez could hit. That guy could hit. And he came up, I think his game was in 1964. Last game of the year, he played, it went in extra innings. I think it was a 10 or 11 inning ball game. And he had a couple of hits in his major league debut, never plays again. I even talked about him with Roy White, who knew him because they were Yankee contemporaries in the minor leagues and around the major leagues at the same time. And everybody said the same thing. The guy could hit, but he just was a butcher in the field. That's my word, nobody else's. But he just was not a gifted defender. And if he had come up 10 years later and the DH was something, and all you have to do is hit, he might have been able to have a successful career because he wouldn't have had to field. So that's one guy who circumstances, he was 10 years before his time. Another guy was Hal Stowe because he came up in 1960, pitched his one game. Casey Stengel loved him. Casey Stengel thought this guy was really going to be something. And then Casey gets fired after the Yankees, fired in parentheses, well, we didn't really fire him, but whatever. After the Yankees lose the 1960 World Series to the Pirates, and Ralph Houck becomes the new Yankee manager, and well, Ralph Houck wasn't as high on Hal Stowe, and Hal Stowe had a more difficult time and he obviously didn't make it, a more difficult time trying to make it back to the major leagues with Ralph Houck. If the Yankees win the 1960 World Series and Casey Stengel remains as the Yankee manager, Hal Stowe probably would have pitched in the major leagues in 1961. Then, think about this, and this is not in the book, but it's just speculating. The 1961 Yankees are considered one of the great teams of all time. Maris hit 61 home runs. Mantle hits 54. Five different guys hit 20 or more home runs. That's one of the most dominating teams ever. Hal Stowe could have only been pretty good, and he could have won 20 games or 18 games, and that could have skyrocketed his career, but it didn't happen. And so those are two examples.
That's fantastic. We're talking with Dr. Paul Semendinger, and we're talking about the book, The Least Among Them. So finally, to wrap up, we mentioned earlier you have a blog, Start Spreading the News. It's a Yankees blog. So where can we get this book, and how else can we follow your latest happenings, Paul?
All right, great. So I have go to Start Spreading the News. It starts spreading the news all together blog. But if you just type in Start Spreading the News Yankees in Google, my site is usually the first thing that pops up now, which is pretty good. But if not, you'll see it. It'll be among the top things. That Sinatra guy sometimes trumps me. He gets above me. But if Sinatra and I are one and two, that's pretty good. I also have a blog where I write more personal stuff and things that aren't related specifically to the Yankees. drpaulsem.com. So drpaulsem.com. That's a lot of motivational stuff. There's some religious stuff on there. There's stuff about running and life, family, playing baseball, whatever. There's some baseball articles as well. Um, So that's where you can find me. I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Paul R. Sem, and Start Spreading the News is on Twitter, so you can find us in both of those places. And the book should be available everywhere. One of the great pleasures in life, one of my greatest thrills, was when I was an aspiring author. I said, someday I hope to be in Barnes and Noble and walk in Barnes and Noble and see my book on the shelf. And that's happened numerous times now. And people have taken pictures. Hey, Paul, I saw your book in Barnes and Noble. Um, I shouldn't tell you this, but when I go into a Barnes and Noble and I find my books on the shelf, I secretly open them, take out a pen and autograph them, and then put them back on the shelf. So some people, if you find my books, they might be autographed. So it's a secret bonus if I find my book in Barnes and Noble. Uh, but yeah, so if not, it's on Amazon. It's everywhere. Or if you go to Start Spreading the News, you can click on the book and you can get it. Or you go to Artemisia Publishing, they're the publishers, and that's apbooks.net.
Fantastic stuff. We'll have to do this again another time. Paul Semendinger, the author of the book The Least Among Them and several other books as well, joining the KPW podcast. So we hope that you have much success with your writing and your book sales, and we'll talk to you again another time, Paul.
Can't wait. KP, thank you. This is so much fun.